Um, Hello, everybody. Welcome to this event as part of Ben's Welcoming Week. Azar, you know what Welcoming Week is because you're here and you've seen all the announcements, and the Vocal Seniority is hosting this three-part series as part of Welcoming Week, and we're proud to be able to do that. And this series is to this is primarily as a safe space for white allies to work through understanding of their part in addressing these issues and their bias, and really work through some of the personal things that will then help them work through some of the societal issues that we have to face. We are fortunate to have Stace Rierson to be our guide for these sessions. Stace began her activism in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She's taught a variety of race and social justice courses at Midwestern universities, most recently at UW-Madison, teaching about the effect of systemic racism on families of color. And of course, not being one-dimensional, she loves cycling, gardening, and hiking with her dog. So
yes,
there's still people joining us. So I will let everybody know that this session is being recorded. Stace has assured me that really shouldn't be anything that should be a problem for folks if this thing were to be published. Well, our intent is to make it available to other people, and we'll put this recording up on the Vocal Seniority's YouTube channel this evening. However, if any of you are uncomfortable with that, you are welcome to let me know. You can do that through the chat, or you can send email to info@thevocalseniority.org. I'll put that in the chat. And if you really, really don't want your face to show up or your voice to show up, because then we're not going to publish it, okay? This is supposed to be a safe space. And then in terms of how this hour will unfold, Stace is going to lay it out for you how she wants you to participate or not participate. Okay, and so the ways in which
guidelines.
Right. So at this point, then I am turning this over to Stace.
Thank you. I am honored to be here on behalf of the Vocal Seniority today. There will be opportunities for people to let their voice be heard, and it will be in response to food items, so absolutely nothing threatening. And so today's session includes a couple of activities, a short video, and a brief discussion at the end. If anyone has Zoom questions, please put them in the chat. We'll try to keep an eye on that and respond to them as quickly as possible, such as I can't find where my chat is when Stace is sharing her screen, you know, some things like that. So Sid, please keep an eye on that. All right. All right, come on. Okay. I want to share a land acknowledgement in respect for the Indigenous peoples who live and lived in greater numbers on this area land. As we come together to learn and share today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of many Indigenous, sorry, the pictures are over my words, of many Indigenous peoples, including the Warm Springs, Wasco, and Paiute Native American tribes. It is important to me to acknowledge the land that I am on and learn how to be more inclusive, since my ancestors were white colonizers and enslavers in the United States. This is a living document, always open to change. All right. These are photos of B.L. Sherrill. She identifies as Black, female, a lesbian, an artist, and formerly behind bars. As you are willing and able, please indicate in the Zoom chat aspects of how you self-identify. We're going to return to BL later in today's session, Chat is most likely at the bottom of your screen, and if you click your cursor in the chat box at the bottom and send your message to everyone if you feel comfortable, that would be terrific. I'm going to give you time to type this in as you feel comfortable. And then we're going to begin an activity. So I'll look for some blue hands, if any are up, for people who'd just like to respond to food items. So go ahead and please chat how you self-identify. All right. And I see no blue hands up. Sid, are you able to unmute all and see if anybody is able, to, maybe they can't find their blue hand, their raised hand. Maybe nobody wants to participate though.
And if you don't know about how to raise your hand, go into your participants panel, hit the participants button, and down at the bottom there should be something, a button that you can hit that allows you to raise your hand so you can be called on.
And I'm just sending out the ask to unmute to people if they feel comfortable. You do not have to unmute yourself.
Well, right now they can't. I'm happy to unmute them if they like. You want me to allow them to change their?
Well, I sent an invitation to everybody if they would like to unmute. And some people have chosen to stay muted, which is totally fine.
Right.
All right, here is our first activity. I'm going to make a statement that is reflective of United States culture. It's almost a full statement, but I left out one word at the end. What I would like you to do is think of that word, finish that statement and say it in your mind, except for people who feel comfortable being unmuted. Please say your response all together if you're unmuted after I complete the prompt. It'll be a naturally flowing word out of your mouth that you'll likely all say it at the same time. This is an easy exercise, especially if you grew up in the United States. Ready? Again, I'm going to show you a phrase missing the last word. Here we go. A common sandwich in the United States is peanut butter and
Jelly.
Jelly.
Right, exactly. Peanut butter and jelly. There you go. Now we're going to do the same exercise again with a different phrase. You supply the missing ingredients of a food combination. I'll give you a clue. It's a sandwich. There are 3 ingredients missing in this sandwich, but I'll reveal each missing ingredient, the space for it, 1 ingredient at a time, so that the people who feel comfortable being unmuted can say it all at the same time. Are you ready? Ready, Donna? Okay. A common sandwich in Australia is Vegemite on
Toast.
only 1 toast.
I thought
Okay.
toast too.
Okay. All right, with
Yes.
Butter.
Mayonnaise.
Mayonnaise.
Ooh,
Vegemite is horrible enough.
all right.
that was wonderful. I had it this morning.
I lived on
our
a
last
backpacking.
space. A common sandwich in Australia is Vegemite on with and
I am have it with butter.
I don't know.
all right, here's your answer. Vegemite on toast with butter and cheese. In other words, it's a grilled cheese sandwich with Vegemite. Now, what is the difference, a major difference between the two questions about sandwiches? So think in your mind, or if you feel comfortable just speaking up, there are a small number of us. What is a major difference?
I've never had a Vegemite sandwich.
Oh, good point. I have, and I don't like it.
So,
Vegemite is toasted.
Right. How about, let's see if I can steer this better. Why is the peanut butter and jelly one familiar?
We were raised with it. Never heard of the other one.
Okay.
Cultural.
It's cultural. It's really cultural things that you were raised around. Go ahead.
I haven't been to Australia. I only hear songs about Vegemite sandwiches.
That's right. Thank you to Men at Work. Okay, so if you feel comfortable, here's another opportunity for you to speak up. Why did you know one sandwich and not the other? Cultural, like you said.
I'm familiar with one, not the other.
Go ahead.
I grew up in the U.S.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing that you're accustomed to. Now, how did you learn this?
My mother.
Okay.
Daily living.
Mm-hmm. Family?
Yeah, at home with friends, at school. They don't allow it in schools anymore.
Mm-hmm. Can you see where we're going with this?
Mm-hmm. About peanut butter and jellies. We can just absorb knowledge about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Exactly.
Ourselves
Are you able to unlearn the association between peanut butter and jelly?
No.
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 No. All right. Should you feel guilty?
It's even used as a metaphor. It's so part of our culture.
Yeah, exactly. So should you feel guilty that you know this association and you can't unlearn it?
No.
No. I want you to realize you should not feel guilty for knowing associations between two things or three things. It's not your fault. Were you consciously aware that you had this strong association with peanut butter? Like, were you completely aware when you're walking around the street, you're at work? Do you think about this all day?
Actually, yeah.
I'm kind of hungry right now.
Right.
It's looking good.
I'm thinking about a Vegemite sandwich myself.
Yes, you are, Sid. Exactly. So think of this, when you're interacting with somebody, when you're watching the news, when you're listening to music, are you thinking about the association between peanut butter and jelly?
No.
No, you're not thinking about it.
Song it is.
Say again.
It depends on which song it is.
Oh, right, the Vegemite. Or you're right, there is a peanut butter and jelly song I've sung in kindergarten. So here's the message from the sandwich activity. If you cannot unlearn this peanut butter and jelly association, what can you do in the future when faced with making an association with peanut butter? And if you don't,
It's about the choice.
Go ahead, Karen.
Huh.
I was going to say, actually stop and think about the question instead of just top of mind association.
Because if we were in Massachusetts, they would be saying peanut butter and marshmallow cream.
oh,
Mhm.
that's cultural too. Anybody else? All right, oh, that's my cat. Okay, so let's go back to B.L. Sherrill, the woman in the photos at the beginning. Judging by her photos, I did not know that B.L. Sherrill was female or is female. I learned society's female visual norms from living in the United States. I didn't learn them in a book, but they were there societally, it's all around me. I'm unable to learn the bias I've learned, and I don't feel guilty for having this bias. I'm aware that I judge gender based on societal cues, but I don't think about my bias regarding female visual cues frequently. It's mostly unconscious. I'm a work in progress. I know I have a preconception or bias of what signifies female. And I know that I need to challenge my bias and prejudge less often. So can you see those parallels between the sandwich and what we do with people?
Yeah.
It's what we have learned in society. It's not necessarily from a book. Like somebody said about peanut butter and jelly, you learned it at home, from your mother, from friends, societally, just from living.
I do have one problem with this, and it's both with the peanut butter and jelly and the female version, is that the statement that I'm unable to unlearn the bias I've learned. I just don't agree. I think you can unlearn that bias. I mean, it's a conscious decision you make to look at it instead of saying peanut butter and jelly, maybe it's peanut butter and bananas, you know.
That's
just a person.
I completely see your point. So that's where at the bottom where I need to challenge my bias and prejudge less often. When I'm faced with peanut butter, I need to pause, which somebody said, and think about other alternatives. When I'm faced with what I've learned to be female societally, I need to pause. I can never clear the information from my brain, but I can adjust. So maybe it's in the semantics of how you define unlearn versus challenge or adjust. Would you say that's kind of?
I like that better, yeah.
Okay, great. I am always learning, and I can adjust that in the future because I'm always learning and people bring up things that aren't clear, and I love that. Let's cover statements about implicit bias before I show you 2 short videos. Implicit bias exists when people unconsciously hold attitudes towards others or associate stereotypes with them. Even if I'm aware of how I judge gender, I judge unconsciously the majority of the time. Second, people's implicit bias may run counter to their conscious beliefs without their realizing it. Implicit bias is also known as unconscious bias or implicit social cognition. Let me stress the risk of negative associations based on societal stereotypes. Positive associations also exist in American society that are detrimental because they are stereotypes. Recognizing one's bias means avoiding all stereotypes and pausing. I love how someone said earlier, pausing and thinking. So when associations are negative or positive, it's related to often a stereotype that is not true for every individual. We're going to watch 2 short videos on unconscious bias that will reinforce many of the concepts we've discussed today, and you'll recognize the American classic, peanut butter and jelly. After the videos, we'll have the remainder of the time for questions and comments, and remember, you're always welcome to put questions, comments in the chat if you don't feel comfortable with us hearing your voice. Okay. Let me.
Implicit bias. Implicit bias.
All right, I'm going to briefly stop share. Okay, can you see that? The video?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay, Great. And Sid, speak up if it doesn't look quite right or sound right, okay?
Will do.
Okay.
Implicit bias. Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes the shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an over-representation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's a scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
All right. We do have some time to discuss each video individually and then again as a compilation. Is there anything that someone wants to share? Reactions, personal experiences?
Well, Roger Sabadini here. So, I'm a biologist, and there's a biological theory that would distinguish a cultural bias like peanut butter and jelly example you gave from gender bias or gender identification. And it has to do with what's called sign stimuli, right? So some argue, and there have been books written about this and papers written about it, that that some of that might be, some of the gender bias or recognition might be genetic, that is hardwired and not cultural. So I'm not stating an opinion on that, but if it's true, the peanut butter and jelly, right, is a cultural learned behavior or association.
Yes.
Bias, but recognizing who is a female and who is a male may have a genetic component to it or an innate component to it. Just an idea. You can't equate the two.
Roger, I completely agree with you. Yes, the peanut butter and jelly is cultural, and the response to female, male, I agree with you. There are different levels, or sorry, let me finish that thought, is more biological. So there are different levels of bias, different levels of how that then relates to prejudice. When people say I'm not prejudiced, to me, I'm hearing I'm not biased. And to me, I'm hearing I don't ever associate X with Y. In my opinion, we're all biased. In my opinion, we all have prejudices, meaning we are prejudiced for or against. If we didn't prejudge things, as in our very earliest, Roger, can you give me a very early pre-human, like a Neanderthal type of?
Human. Well, in the animal kingdom, there's sexual dimorphism. That is, male birds look different than female birds of the same species, right? And that's
I mean, if you could supply a name for like a Neanderthal, some type of.
okay. Well, then breasts. Okay.
No. Like Homo sapien, Homo erectus, Homo.
Yeah.
Neanderthal, some kind of human. What I was, the point that I was thinking is in our various early human form.
Goes back to Australopithecus.
Okay, Australopithecus. Yes. All right. We're going to take those guys. Were they near saber-toothed tigers? Yeah,
what about that?
Okay, so if we didn't judge, when we were Australopithecus, if we didn't judge a saber-toothed tiger as inherently unfriendly and we better run, we would all be dead.
Yeah.
So in my point that became a little drawn out is we're always judging, we're always prejudging situations. And if we didn't do that, we'd be dead because of the saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah, that's why I say there's an argument that even gender recognition and gender, you might call bias, but other biologists would not be pejorative, would say that it's gender recognition and it has survival value so that you could mate. So I'm just saying.
Oh yeah, Roger, I totally agree with you. And a lot of that can be cultural too. In different cultures, the female expectation of what a female looks like could be adjusted for different cultures.
So like Sherelle, I recognized her as a female because of her name, not because of what she looked like. So, but it's important biologically to recognize gender. I'm just saying.
I agree.
So you could procreate.
Anybody else, comments, questions, reactions so far? All right, let's go on to the second video.
Stace, I'll say something.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Alan.
You know, what Roger was bringing up, I was thinking about it, you know, and there's a difference for me anyway, in terms of recognition, male versus female, versus putting some kind of a value or judgment, something above and beyond just the genetic, you know, just the gender difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I think that maybe applies a little more to our topic as opposed to, you know, hardwired things being placed there sort of like it's there to begin with, but it's going to be modified later on. And our biases in judgment are the modifications above and beyond that, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. And I was thinking like there are, yeah, cultural modifications of what might in that culture represent what a female looks like.
I think that's a really, really good question. I was just thinking about genetic differences between male and female and thinking how strange it is that we culturally, it is the females that get all dressed up in bright, shiny costumes in order to attract the males, when in nature you see the opposite. It's the men that are all dressed up with their feathers and stuff. But to Alan's point, you know, what value do we place on that? In our culture, we say that women, and specifically girls, they're weaker, they're more emotional, you know, weaker being a bad thing, not just don't have the physical strength. We're more emotional. We, you know, just all of these cultural attachments to the biological necessity of being able to procreate the species.
Yeah, Barb. Yeah, I can certainly.
You know, in the
see that.
end, to complicate things above and beyond what I just said, we now understand that this male-female thing is not binary. And there's a whole, you know, nuance connection between the opposite ends of this whole spectrum. And then our judgments get confused by trying to deal with that whole continuum of between the two binary points too. So it gets really complicated.
Oh, Betsy, yeah.
So sort of opened the way for me to share some thoughts I've been having for a while. Whenever we're asked to identify who we are, the she, her, hers, I always cringe because publicly and biologically, I am she. But inside, having grown up as what they used to call a tomboy, in many ways acting out my male side, I'm both, and so what we was sharing about that that the binary, it's not binary anymore. But when we're in a circle and I'm supposed to identify, I would go, if I say they, or if I say she and he, people say, what? You're appropriating what you're not living. You know, it's very confusing. I just want to share that confusion with you. And if we're ever in a group and I just fumble with that, you'll know why.
And so, Betsy, that's one of the reasons I wanted people to freely share, if they wanted to, how they self-identify, because people are judged frequently by their outward presentation, but that's not how they identify personally.
Can I extend the biological concept just a minute? So even though I studied evolution, okay, I also studied psychology. I got a degree in psychology as well as biology, but anyway. So as strong as our, let's call it biological evolution is and has been, we have such a thing called cultural evolution that can even trump our biases, our, let's call them, if you want to call them biases, that might be hardwired and part of our evolutionary development. So what distinguishes humans from all other animal species, including other hominids, you know, like the great apes, chimpanzees, and so on, is our culture is so strong that I believe our culture can override a lot of the biological hardwire. And if you believe in that premise, you can believe that you can unlearn some biases that you might have, even if they are gender biases, as we discussed previously. Violence is something I thought a lot about. Is violence innate or learned, and so on and so forth? So I think there's hope. Because of our cultural evolution, we can unlearn, just like I can learn to like Vegemite. I hate Vegemite, but I can learn to love it. Just like the first time I ever drank a grappa, you know, I thought it was like, you know, medicine, but I love grappa now. So you can unlearn biases.
And yes, Roger, thanks for that. It reminds me of just like 30 minutes ago, I can't recall who brought it up about the semantics of unlearning versus adjusting for and being aware of and pausing.
Like what if you were forced to eat peanut butter and jelly every day because you were imprisoned by some terrorist or somebody that only gave you peanut butter and jelly? You could turn from loving peanut butter and jelly to hating peanut butter and jelly. So you can unlearn a bias that you might have that might be favorable.
let's take a pause and watch our second video. All right. Next video is implicit bias. Check our bias to wreck our bias.
Let's look at how to measure bias in ourselves and in others. Here's Dolly Chu from NYU.
We sent emails to real professors in real universities.
They contacted over 6,500 professors at random from 260 American universities.
We sent them an email that looked like it came from a real person asking for a meeting to learn more about the PhD program in that university. But we randomly assigned whether the fictional person sending that email had a name that sounded male or female and sounded white, Chinese, Hispanic, Indian, or Black. What we found that if you were a white male, you were far more likely to receive a response back than if you were in all those other categories put together as a group.
Some of this could be explicit racism, but it's far more likely that in many cases, these professors are just busy. They can't respond to every email they get. So they kind of let their subconscious decide for them. And that's where their biases come through. Research shows that our racial biases are often more about who we choose to help than who we don't. And we tend to help people who are similar to us. But you aren't 6,500 randomly selected professors. So how can you figure out where you might be making similar unconscious choices? First, there's a well-known test online you can take that can help show you biases you hold. Or
just do an audit. Whatever data you have, whether it's formal data in a computer or whether it's just data that's sort of anecdotal, look at the data. For example, I met this fantastic executive in Silicon Valley. He takes great pride in being someone who actively tries to achieve gender balance on his teams, knowing that Silicon Valley and tech are skewed heavily male.
So he looked at his professional social network, his Twitter, his LinkedIn.
He found his network was far more skewed male than he expected. So there's a place where he could actively work to shift that, and that's what he's been doing since then.
So this is not a scientifically exact self-audit, but it can still be useful, and you can audit anything. So maybe start by taking that online test for bias. Maybe check out whose emails you're replying to. But you can also audit yourself for implicit bias by asking a friend to observe you in the real world. If you're a teacher, have people look at who you call on most in class, whatever your interactions are.
One practical thing that people should do is take stock of their friends. It would be very useful for people to actually make lists of people with whom they spend time.
Look for patterns. That's the audit. That's the assessment we can all do.
Next time, some people say you should go out and make as many friends of different races as possible, but does that actually work?
Put this into a little bit of perspective, 2 points. Tara, just like peanut butter and jelly, you pick things up societally, even though they may go against your outward world, your conscious world. Also, when women take tests, they often find that they're biased more against men. But they're married to men, perhaps. They love men, perhaps. But they find that men are more in a negative term. So Tara, think of that like as a parallel. Often who we might unconsciously be biased against is who we marry. There's some that's something to think about. And Barb, you look like you were thinking on that one. Like,
Yeah, I took the bias test about associating blacks and weapons, and it showed that I was somewhat biased. I wasn't totally surprised because I've taken it before, and I guess the conclusion I draw from that, at least on the near term, is like, well, I'd be unsuitable for a position like a police officer where I had to make sudden decisions about whether someone was a threat, because I know that bias is in me.
Good point.
I had to do a lot of self-assessment and changing my own behavior when I started teaching school, having been a person who in my youth might have been caught saying that men are pigs. And there absolutely is evidence that 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 pendulum swung too far, and bias against men shows up in folks like me. And as a teacher, that's not okay. As a teacher, I always use the strategy, had a cup of popsicle sticks to be able to call on kids randomly, and because these biases are so profound and they're so deep that unless you actually take physical measures like popsicle sticks to
with the kids' names on them.
Absolutely, right? Yes. So you're not always calling on that same kid who's waving his hand around and knows the answer, that you're calling every single kid in the classroom. And that's my experience, is having to actually put in physical measures against my own biases, honestly.
Can you ever unlearn that bias, Barb, of calling on boys? No, you can't unlearn it. And this again is the semantics of it, but you can do things to pause and adjust.
That's right. There's another study with babies, just infants.
Oh yes.
Right. And whether you tell someone and you just tell them it's a boy or girl. And if the babies that people think are girls are crying, oh, they're upset, they've been hurt, but if you tell them it's a boy, they're angry. That baby's crying because he's angry. Honestly, the biases places you'd never imagine, which is why we're all here today. So thank you, Vocal Seniority.
Way to go, Sid. And Roger, right? Yes. Anyone else feel like commenting on reactions, questions, life events? Mimi wrote, recognizing our biases is the first step in getting around them. Totally.
Absolutely right.
Adjust, pause, get around.
And what you spoke about at the very beginning, get away from the guilt. Give yourself that permission to stop feeling guilty, and just move forward with things like showing up here today and popsicle sticks. And you don't need to beat yourself up. That's not necessarily helpful. Just acknowledge and move forward.
I think Kara's story just illustrates this so beautifully that we can have a bias and we can't unlearn it, but we can actually genuinely love and choose someone because of what we believe in our hearts. And
yeah.
I wanted to say on top of Barb's comment about giving ourselves space from feeling guilty, I think it goes to a deeper level called vulnerability, which is a real difficult place for, I think, me to be in, and I suspect for almost everybody to be in. But that's where we really find out more information about who we are, how we operate in the world, is when we allow ourselves to become vulnerable out there in front of other people.
Well said. Excellent point.
I might pop up for a second here. It seems that, I mean, in terms of guilt in particular, that's also something that is ingrained in folks culturally. And so I am constitutionally incapable of not feeling guilt. You may have seen how I self-identified. I am a white, Jewish, cishet male, okay? And that second item means, I mean, if you had met my mother, you would understand, I will be guilty for all of my life, okay? So dealing with the issues is culturally ingrained, right? And what I was struck by when we talked earlier was making that clear distinction between bias and prejudice. And even since you initially defined those, Stace, they've been used in the subsequent discussion using bias when prejudice was meant. And I think that we need to get really clear on the distinction of those two terms. I felt like the lesson for me was we're not really going to change our biases. We can modify our prejudices. Okay, we're not going to change who we are. That's deeply built in, but we can change our behaviors at least. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
That is really interesting to think about, Sid, about how what you, I think we're reflecting is bias is more really internal, how we're raised culturally, but prejudice is more our outward portrayal of them. Yeah, I need to think on that. I mean, I'm always taking in new ideas. So. One thing that I do very consciously now is if I see an animal like a squirrel, I can't tell the gender of a squirrel, I'll automatically refer to her as she. Often we say, oh, look at Mr. Squirrel, and we default to the male. So now I intentionally default to the female when it is an animal or a plant or something. Instead of calling it it, often it's it, but I'll default to female. Isn't she, the squirrel, cute? And people will ask, well, how do you know it's female? And then I'll ask, well, when we say it's male, how do you know it's male? So people question when you start to change the gender or change the identity of things when they had never questioned the default before. Yeah, Barb's like, yeah, I got that.
I was about to admit that I was watching Naked and Afraid last night, thinking about that same thing. The men, when they're about to kill an animal, it's a she. The alligator was a she, the snake was a she, the turtle was a she. I'm not kidding. Yeah, it's really, I was literally noticing that last night. Yeah. Yeah. And then, you know, we've all known like cars forever. Men call their cars she, her, you know, it's just, wow, so many things.
Naomi, yeah.
Yeah, quick question. It's funny that you brought this up, Stace, because I have a 4-year-old and we're doing a lot of that now when we're looking at the male versus females. I guess there's house sparrows, but the male has the markings on the face and the females are all gray. So we're looking for that. And there's some times where we can't differentiate. I've been trying to get myself to do the same thing, but I'm having a hard time broaching the subject with her about just the dynamic.
You know, binary?
Yes, she's always like, so is it a girl or a boy? And I'm like, you know, this is my first and only child, so I'm kind of new to this parenting scene, and you know, any resources that you would have on that, I'd appreciate, because I want to do right by this. I want to make sure that the resources and information that are available to my child is much more than was available to me growing up. And yeah, I'm afraid of making a mistake, but I know at the same time that that's how we learn. So I'm trying to be forgiving of myself, but to let her know I made a mistake on that. I shouldn't have said that. What I should have said was this. But it's been, you know, I just want to do as best as I can. So that's something that I'm struggling with right now with my daughter. So if anybody has any ideas on that, I'm you know, looking for children's books, and even scenario. I mean, they surface. We go, well, pre-COVID, we would go to, you know, the library and read, and there would be what appeared to be a boy in a dress, and she would ask me about it, and I would say, well, maybe that's what that person wants to wear, and you can do that. And if you want to have short hair, if you want to have long hair, if you want to have earrings, if you don't want to have earrings, it's really going to be a personal choice for what you want to do with your life.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like, okay, so I mean, she's 4, so it kind of, I don't know how much of it sticks, but you know, I'm trying to set the right foundation, and I'm struggling because I don't know what I'm doing. So just wanted to share that.
Thanks. That's great. There are really good children's books. Have you Googled non-binary children's books or genderqueer children's books? They're very, very good resources for different reading levels. All right, well, I know we're at a little bit past our hour time. Are there any closing thoughts?
I think that we, you know, forgiving ourselves. I think that is the sentence that came out that is so important. Sid's mom, you know, did not make a mistake in ingraining him with what we call guilt. You know, the other thing to call that is, you know, is your conscience. And that is something that, you know, we all treasure in ourselves is, you know, let your conscience be your guide. Let the guilt that your mom instilled in you be your guide, but then also be, you know, forgiving of yourself. The 12-step programs, the hidden secret to 12-step programs is that you've got to forgive yourself. Forgiving other people is relatively easy. We're much more generous with other people than we are with ourselves oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think that the term bias and the term prejudice that Sid so nicely tried to distinguish, I think they're both pejorative, actually. And I think really maybe we ought to, some biases, moral judgments, I would maybe use the term moral judgment, and that moral judgment can be positive or negative. So is there a term that we could use that is not pejorative, that indicates our preferences or our moral judgments? Because sometimes, like recognizing the saber-toothed tiger as being dangerous, or a guy with an AR-15 as being dangerous, has survival value.
Yeah.
So, is there bias is pejorative?
Yeah, I was thinking of the word self-limiting. You know, instead of trying to say go to that dualistic good, bad, whatever, and put value and moral judgments on it, just say, if I'm really interested in finding out who I am and how I operate, understanding my operating system, I need to know what's limiting for me to be able to expand my view of the world and reality. So for me, it's self-limiting, and I don't want that. I want it out of the way so I can learn more about who I am and how I see the world.
Ellen, if you could see all the nodding heads, I don't know, Ellen, if you're in gallery view, but you've got a lot of nodding heads out there. I've put the next 2 sessions in the chat with the URLs. Yes, and Barb says, thank you so much. Radically inclusive vocal seniority.
How do you get to those tests that people have been mentioning about?
Yeah, I also put that in the chat. And if you type in Harvard IAT, which is Implicit Attitudes Test. And probably with all of the world events going on now, if you just put in Harvard, I bet you would just come up. But there are many IAT, Implicit Attitudes Tests, at that website that are reputable. And yeah.
Stace, you will also email us the links, right?
Sid's nodding yes.
We will. I would like to add that for anybody who wants to, if you don't know this already, if you bring up your chat box and down in the right-hand corner, you will see a square with 3 dots in it. And if you click on that and then you choose Save Chat, it will save the entirety of the chat to your computer, and you will be able to have all those links that were written down. You didn't have to be writing them down all by yourself. And even after we are finished here, I'm going to leave the session open long enough for people to find that and save the chat.
Yeah, great. And this is the Save Chat function is something for Zoom meetings that you have to set ahead of time. You can't mid-meeting change the setting. Just for Zoom lesson. Ellen knows I teach Zoom classes. I want to thank everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing as much as you did. And I hope to see you in the next 2 sessions, next Thursday, next Saturday. And I've put those links again into the chat.
Thanks so much, Stace. Nice job.
Hey, thank you so much, everybody.
Okay. And on behalf of the Vocal Seniority, I'd like to thank Stace in particular for putting these things together. She's been very patient while we go through all the god-awful logistics of setting up things like this. And thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again on Thursday and Saturday. And once again, I want to emphasize anyone who is uncomfortable with having their visage and their words be a part of the recording of this, just let me know. It's easy enough for me to edit those pieces out. So again, time to save your chat, and I'm going to then sign off and hopefully see you all again on Thursday, and bring your friends.